This video is about 9-7, adding fractions with unlike denominators. This means that we'll be adding fractions where the denominators are different numbers. There are 4 steps when adding fractions if they have different denominators. The first thing you must do is find a common denominator, then rewrite the fractions like we did in 9-6. Then you add the numerators and keep the denominators the same. Let's go over that a little bit more in depth. So, for an example, if I were adding 1/2 plus 2/3, the first thing I need to do is find a common denominator. 2 and 3 have many different common denominators, but one that's easy for me is 6. So I'm done with step 1. Step 2, I need to rewrite the fractions so that they have the denominator of 6. To turn 2 into 6, I multiplied by 3 from here to here, so I need to multiply 1 by 3, which is 3. For 2/3, my denominator is now 6. To get from 3 to 6, I multiply by 2, so my numerator, 2 times 2, is 4. Done with step 2. Step 3 says to add the numerators. 3 plus 4 is 7. That becomes your new numerator. Step 4, keep the denominator the same, 6. That's how you add fractions. All you do once you have common denominators is add the top numbers and keep the bottom number the same. So my answer is 7/6. Is it okay for the top number to be bigger than the bottom number? Yes, that's totally fine. Why do you think we keep the denominator the same? I want you to think about that for a moment, and I'll talk about it on the next slide. This is why we keep the denominator the same when we add fractions. I want you to think about an easy example, like 1/2 plus 1/2. Some people try to add fractions by adding the top numbers, 1 plus 1 is 2, and adding the bottom numbers, 2 plus 2 is 4. But let's look at a picture. If I have 1/2 of a pizza plus another half of a pizza, I have 2 halves, or 1 whole. Not 2/4, that would be the same as 2/4, or 1/2. So, the bottom number, the denominator, is like a label. It's telling us how big the pieces are. So, the top number is telling us how many pieces we have. When I add fractions, like when I added this half on the left with the half of the pizza on the right, the size of the shape, or the piece, which is the denominator, doesn't change. All that changes is the amount of pieces I have, which is the numerator. I'll explain this a little bit more in class tomorrow, but let's look at another example of how to add fractions. Let's go back to our 4 steps. Hopefully you understand a bit more now about why we keep the denominator the same, which is what step 4 down here says to do. Let's go over another example of how to add 2 fractions using these 4 steps. If I had the fractions 2/9 plus 2/3, let's go through our steps to add these fractions together. First step is to find a common denominator. 9 and 3 have a common denominator of 9. Could I have picked another number like 27 or something bigger? Yes. In this case, I can pick any common denominator, but I'm just going to pick 9. So I can then move on to step 2, which is to rewrite the fractions with that common denominator. 2/9 is already written in terms of ninths, so now I just need to change 2/3 into some amount of ninths. To get from 3 to 9, I multiply by 3, so 2 times 3 is 6. Step 3, add the numerators. This equals 8 over, and step 4, keep the denominator the same, 9. So my answer is 8 over 9, or 8/9. Again, the size of the piece, the denominators, doesn't change. All I'm doing is adding more pieces. So my numerator, which is the number of pieces, gets bigger as I add more pieces, and my denominator, which is the size of the pieces, stays the same. Let's try one more together, but with a word problem. Cindy added 5/8 cup water to 2/3 cup juice concentrate. How many cups of juice did she make? Think back to cubes, which is the problem-solving strategy that we have already learned. Circle any important numbers. That's always your first step. It wants to know how many cups did she make. It's asking how many cups in all, which is an important math phrase because it tells us that we're looking for the total. So I know that I need to add 5/8 plus 2/3. Remember our 4 steps when we're adding fractions. The first step is to find a common denominator. 8 and 3 have many different common denominators, but the lowest common denominator that they have is 24. Then step 2 tells me to change each of these fractions, 5/8 and 2/3, into fractions that have a denominator of 24. To get from 8 to 24, I multiply by 3, so 5 times 3 is 15. To get from 3 to 24, I multiply by 8, so 2 times 8 is 16. The next step is to add the numerators. 15 plus 16 equals 31, and the last step is to keep the denominator the same, 24. Is it okay to have a numerator that's bigger than a denominator? Yeah, that's totally fine. That would be similar to saying that we had something like 3/4 and we added 2/4 and now we have 5/4 or 1 and 1/4. So it's totally fine to have more than one. In this case, that just means that she has more than 1 cup of juice, and that's okay. I want you to go ahead and try this one on your own. I've put the 4 steps up here to help you along the way. Your problem is 7/8 plus 1/12. Oopsies. Add these fractions up, show your work, and bring it with you to class tomorrow. Good luck.